Imagine being left behind by the man who promised to protect you, while his mother stood close enough to enjoy your humiliation like it was entertainment. Would you beg for dignity, walk away in silence, or make one call and trust that the truth would finally arrive? Let's see how long love feeds you when my son is gone, because in this family, a wife without power is just furniture with feelings. My mother-in-law, Patricia Holloway, said that to me in the front hall of our house the morning my husband drove away and left me standing there in slippers, still holding the breakfast he never touched. 3 weeks later, the same woman nearly dropped her teacup when a black Rolls-Royce stopped in front of her lawn, and the man who stepped out asked for me by my full name. Before I take you all the way into this, let me know who's here with me. Type present in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is in your part of the world right now. And if you've already liked and subscribed, thank you more than I can explain. I hope whatever burden you carried into today gets lighter, and I hope peace finds you in a very ordinary, steady way. Stay with me because what happened to me still feels unreal when I say it out loud. My name is Rebecca Sloan. I was 34 when all of this began unraveling in a way I could no longer explain away. At the time, I worked as a senior event coordinator for a boutique hotel group in Charleston, South Carolina. My job looked glamorous from the outside because people heard events and imagined flowers, champagne, and expensive dresses. What it actually meant was 12-hour days, emergency phone calls, smiling through impossible clients, and carrying everyone else's chaos without letting it show on my face. I was good at it, too. I built my reputation on being the woman who could hold a room together while it quietly caught fire behind the walls. I had been married for 6 years to Andrew Holloway, who was 38 and worked in commercial development. He was sharp, disciplined, and very polished in public. He knew how to shake hands, how to lower his voice at exactly the right moment, how to make people feel chosen when he looked at them. That was one of the first things I fell in love with. When Andrew paid attention to you, it felt like standing in warm light. We lived in a restored white-column house just outside the historic district, a property that had been in his family for years. People always assumed it belonged to both of us equally because we were married, and because I managed it like it did. I knew the service schedules, the insurance renewals, the gardener's name, the dry cleaner's holiday hours, which kitchen cabinet door needed a lift before it would shut right, and which guests Patricia secretly hated, but invited anyway. I made that house function. I made holidays happen in it. I made it feel lived in. But on paper, the house was never mine. That detail matters more than I understood at the time. I did not come from that kind of world. My parents were school employees in Knoxville, Tennessee. My mother spent 30 years as a library assistant, and my father worked in facilities management for the district. We did not have wealth, but we had routine, decency, and the kind of love that looked unremarkable from the outside and turned out to be priceless once I lost my footing. My parents raised me to be dependable, to contribute, to stay calm, to never make a scene if a problem could be handled quietly. That lesson helped me in my career. It nearly ruined me in my marriage. The emotional center of all of this was not just that I loved Andrew. It was that I had built my adult life around the belief that I had finally been chosen by a family that was stable, established, and certain. Andrew used to tell me that with me, life felt softer, safer. He said I gave him a kind of peace he'd never had growing up under Patricia's perfection. And because I knew his mother could be cold, because I saw how carefully he managed her moods, I convinced myself that whatever sharpness existed in that family was survivable if I stayed patient enough. Patricia Holloway was 62, immaculately dressed even at breakfast, and the kind of woman who never had to raise her voice because contempt sat so comfortably on her. She had once chaired museum boards, charity committees, and political fundraisers, and she carried herself like every room was a court she had already won. She wasn't loud. Loud would have been easier. Patricia specialized in elegant cruelty. A sentence from her could sound like concern to strangers and feel like a blade under the ribs to the person she aimed it at. Andrew's father, Martin Holloway, was quieter. He had retired early after selling off part of a construction materials business years before I met them. Martin was not a cruel man, exactly. His weakness was softer and more disappointing. He withdrew. When Patricia did something ugly, he became fascinated with the newspaper, the stock report, the weather, anything that let him remain physically present while morally absent. There were other people around the edges of my life then. Nora Whitfield was my closest friend, an employment attorney with a dry sense of humor and the useful habit of asking one more question than most people wanted to answer. We met in college and never fully stopped acting like sisters. She lived 20 minutes away, knew I smoothed things over too quickly, and had been telling me for years that there was a difference between being mature and being trainable. Then there was Elise Carter, our CFO at work, a woman in her 40s who missed very little. She mattered later, though at the time, I only knew her as my boss's boss and the rare executive who said thank you to the staff by name. And there was one other name, one I need to mention early, even though I didn't understand then how important it would become: Graham Ashford. I had heard the name only twice before everything fell apart. The first time was in passing for my father, years earlier, when he mentioned that an old college friend of my late grandfather had become ridiculously successful. The second time was in my own house, when I came into Andrew's office one evening and saw that name on an envelope before he casually turned it face down. At the time, I thought nothing of it. That was my mistake. Not because I was foolish, but because when you are busy surviving small discomforts every day, you do not always recognize which detail belongs to the future. The first uneasy sign did not look like a disaster. It looked like one of those moments women are trained to minimize. It happened on a Sunday brunch Patricia hosted for two couples from church and one local councilman's wife she liked to impress. I had spent the entire morning setting the dining table, reheating the quiche, arranging fruit, and making sure Martin's blood pressure-friendly tea was in the right pot because Patricia insisted the guests notice how attentive this household is. That was how she referred to me sometimes. This household. Not daughter-in-law. Not Rebecca. Just a function. I remember carrying out a tray of coffee cups when I heard the councilman's wife ask Patricia whether Andrew and I planned to start a family soon. It was a normal question, the kind people ask with a smile and no awareness that they're stepping on something tender. Before I could answer, Patricia smiled into her cup and said, "Well, some blessings arrive naturally and others require a stronger prayer life." The women laughed politely because they thought she was making a harmless joke. Andrew, standing near the sideboard, gave that little tight smile he used when he wanted discomfort to keep moving. Without confronting it, I felt heat climb my chest. At that point, Andrew and I had been quietly trying to have a child for almost 2 years. We had not told his parents details. We had barely told anyone. There had been one chemical pregnancy I cried over alone in a bathroom because Andrew was not good with emotional spirals, and after that I stopped bringing him every fear as honestly as I should have. I set the tray down carefully and said, "We'll share news when we have it." Patricia looked at me with that almost sympathetic expression she used when she wanted to sound gracious while claiming the higher ground. "Of course, dear. Some women are simply better suited to nurturing than producing. There are different ways to be useful." The room went quiet in a way that was somehow worse than open conflict. One of the guests glanced at me, and then away. Martin cleared his throat and asked whether anyone had seen the article about downtown parking reforms. Andrew said nothing. Nothing. Not even a mother enough. That was the first moment something old and stubborn inside me asked a dangerous question. If he won't offend me in front of people, what exactly is he protecting? I wish I could tell you I drew a line. Right then. I didn't. I did what many women do when they love someone and do not want to believe the shape of their marriage has already changed. I took the dishes back into the kitchen. I rinsed cups I could barely see through the blur in my eyes. Then Andrew found me a few minutes later and wrapped a hand lightly around my waist like that should have fixed it. "Don't let her get under your skin," he murmured. I looked at him and said, "She said that in front of guests." He sighed, not angrily, but with that calm impatience that made me feel like I was adding unnecessary weight to his day. "You know how she is." There it was. The sentence that excuses generations of damage. You know how she is. I asked. And do you know how that felt? He kissed my temple like I was overworked rather than wounded. Becca, please. Not now. Not now became the burial ground of every important conversation in my marriage. After that brunch, little things began arranging themselves into a pattern I could no longer call accidental. Patricia started making comments with increasing precision. If I came home late from work after saving a six-figure client event from disaster, she would say, "A woman who stays out that much should not be surprised when home stops revolving around her." If I skipped dessert, she would ask whether stress was affecting my hormones again. When friends asked why Andrew and I had not taken a summer trip, she'd answer before I could, "They're waiting for life to settle," although some lives refused to cooperate. It was never enough to explode over in public. That was part of her intelligence. Patricia understood deniability better than most lawyers. Andrew changed too, but so gradually that I kept explaining him to myself in kinder language than he had earned. He started working later, taking calls outside, locking his office door at home even though he never used to. He became oddly possessive of ordinary things like mail, billing statements, even calendar reminders. If I asked whether something was wrong, he would tell me I was tense, that work had made me suspicious, that not every private thought was a betrayal. Sometimes he was so measured about it that I would leave the room wondering whether I had, in fact, become dramatic. That is what gaslighting looks like when practiced by educated people. It is not always wild denials or obvious lies. Sometimes it is a steady rearranging of your confidence until you start apologizing for noticing patterns. One Tuesday evening, about 3 months after that brunch, I came home earlier than expected because a corporate client postponed a site inspection. I entered through the side door and heard Andrew in his office, speaking low and fast. He did not know I was home. I only caught a few sentences before he heard the floorboard near the hall shift under me. "No, not yet," he said. "If she sees the transfer before I handle the rest, it gets messy." There was a pause. Then, "My mother needs to stop calling from the house." I said I'd deal with her. The moment he saw me through the half-open door, his expression changed. Not guilt. Calculation. He ended the call, came out into the hallway, and asked why I was home early in a tone that made the answer seem more suspicious than his conversation. I said, "Who are you talking about?" He did not even blink. "A zoning issue." "Then why did you say if she sees the transfer?" He gave the faintest laugh, the kind used to signal that the question itself is amateur. "Property transfer, Rebecca. It's work." There are moments when your instincts stand up before your logic does. I knew he was lying. I didn't yet know about what. That same night, while folding one of his jackets before sending it to the cleaner, I found a folded paper in the inner pocket. I almost put it back. Then I saw my own name. The document was not a full file, just a copied page from what looked like a financial account summary. At the top were 2 trust names I did not recognize, and lower down, typed in a formal font, was a line that read, "Contingent review pending notification to Rebecca Sloan, named beneficiary under prior instruction." I stared at it for a long time. It could have meant nothing. Or everything. There were other details. An old law office letterhead from New York. A date from 8 months earlier. A reference number. And the name Graham Ashford again. My hands felt cold. Not because I understood it, but because I didn't. I slipped the document into a recipe binder in the kitchen, behind a page for lemon loaf I never used. Then I put the jacket away and waited for Andrew to say something on his own. He never did. That scrap of paper became the first piece of evidence I kept without fully understanding its value. At the time, I told myself I was only holding on to it until I could ask the right question. The truth is, some part of me already knew I would not get clean answers from my husband. Pressure became the rhythm of the house. After that, Patricia found new ways to remind me that my place there was conditional. One afternoon, while arranging flowers for a dinner party she insisted on hosting even though Martin had a migraine, she watched me trim stems and said, "A woman should never become too comfortable in a house built by another family's money." I said, very evenly, "I work, Patricia." She smiled. Oh, I know. You're useful,
I,
said, comfortable. Comments like that can sound small when repeated later. They do not feel small while you are living inside them. They accumulate. They train your body into vigilance. I began listening for footsteps in hallways, measuring my answers, editing my facial expressions, timing when I used shared spaces. I did not feel like a wife anymore. I felt like a tenant in a hostile museum. Nora noticed before anyone else did. She took one look at me over dinner one Friday night and said, "You look like you're bracing for impact between bites." I tried to laugh it off, but Nora had known me since I was 19. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and waited. So I told her some version of the truth. Patricia's comments, Andrew's distance, the strange document, the fact that my husband had started acting as if transparency itself were an unreasonable demand. Nora did not interrupt. When I finished, she asked, "Do you have a photo of the paper?"
no.
I hid the original. Good. I stared at her. Good. Yes, good. Because something about that wording bothers me. Beneficiary under prior instruction is not casual language. And if your name is on paperwork Andrew never told you about, you need to stop assuming that confusion is harmless. I felt my throat tighten. Do you think he's stealing from me? I think I don't know yet, she said. And neither do you. That's why you need information before confrontation. That was the first time someone in my life named the thing I had been afraid to do. Not react. Investigate. I wish I could say that conversation transformed me instantly into a strategic, clear-eyed woman. It didn't. Real life is slower than that. I went home, made polite conversation at dinner, and pretended not to notice Andrew texting under the table. But now there was a split in me. One part still wanted my marriage to survive. The other had started recording mental timestamps. The gaslighting intensified when I began asking more careful questions. A week later, I mentioned that I had found an old law office name on a paper mixed in with his things, and asked whether there was some estate matter involving my family I should know about. I asked it gently, almost stupidly gently. Andrew set down his fork and looked at me with controlled disbelief. "You're going through my pockets now?" "That's not what I said." "It was in my jacket, Rebecca. I was sending it to the cleaner. It had my name on it." He leaned back and gave me a look I had started dreading, a look that combined disappointment and pity. "This is exactly what I mean when I say your anxiety is becoming a problem. You take fragments, invent whole stories, then put me in the position of calming you down." I actually apologized. That is the part one hates admitting. But it's true. I apologized for being upset that my name had appeared on legal-looking financial paperwork my husband never mentioned. He softened immediately when I backed down, which taught me something I was not ready to say out loud. His kindness had become reward-based. If I doubted myself, he became reassuring. If I trusted my own perception, he became cold. Patricia joined the campaign in subtler ways. She began suggesting I was burning out and needed rest. She started mentioning wellness retreats, hormone specialists, quiet time away from work. Once, in front of Martin, she touched my wrist and said, "You've seemed unstable lately, dear. Forgetful. Sensitive. I'm worried people will notice." That sentence lodged in me like a splinter. I wasn't unstable. But after enough people imply you are fragile, you begin monitoring yourself for cracks you didn't previously have. Around that same time, Andrew started withholding information about money in ways he framed as simplification. He said he had taken over more of the household financial management because I was already so overloaded. Credit card statements stopped coming to the kitchen mail stack. An insurance renewal I had always handled was suddenly done. A quarterly investment summary, with both our names that used to come by email, no longer appeared in my inbox. When I asked, he said the advisor had consolidated communications. I almost believed him until I got an odd email at work from our bank's fraud notification system telling me that login preferences had been updated on a joint account. Not moved. Updated. I called the number during my lunch break, and after answering security questions, the representative told me that secondary notification settings had been removed 2 days earlier. Secondary. Mine. I sat in my office with the blinds half closed, listening to the woman repeat herself in a professionally neutral voice, while something icy settled in my chest. I asked whether any money had been moved. She said there had been a scheduled transfer between linked accounts, but because both accounts were under the same household profile, she could not explain more without the account holder present or additional verification in person. When I got home and asked Andrew directly, he did not shout. Again, that would have been easier. He looked offended. I made one adjustment because the system kept duplicating alerts while I was in meetings. You're acting like I drained our life savings. You removed my notifications without telling me. He rubbed his forehead like I was noise. I was going to tell you. When? Rebecca, do you hear yourself? That question. Always designed to make me step outside my own body and judge myself from his angle. Patricia overheard part of that exchange from the doorway and said, "Financial management isn't emotional. Andrew is trying to reduce chaos. You should be thanking him." I remember turning toward her so slowly because I knew if I moved too fast, I would say something irreversible. "This is between me and my husband." She smiled, victorious because she had gotten under my skin. Exactly. Isolation is not always someone locking you away from others. Sometimes it is your reality being steadily challenged until you stop reaching outward because explaining it feels exhausting. I called my mother less because I didn't want her to worry. I stopped inviting coworkers over because I could not bear the strain of performing normality inside that house. I started sleeping lightly. Sometimes Andrew came to bed after midnight smelling like expensive cologne and city air, and when I asked where he had been, he'd say, "With clients," as though repetition itself could turn vagueness into proof. Then came the woman who made all my doubts suddenly feel visible. Her name was Lauren Price. She was in her early 30s, well-dressed, composed, and worked for a consulting firm Andrew's company used on several projects. I met her at a fundraising gala my hotel group helped host. She was seated at our table because Andrew had requested an extra seat late, saying one of his project advisors needed to attend. Lauren was smart, polished, and never once did anything obvious enough to let me accuse her of crossing a line. But she and Andrew had the kind of overly controlled familiarity that told on itself. Finished sentences. Shared glances that ended a fraction too late. A comfort level that did not belong to strictly professional acquaintances. During dessert, Patricia leaned toward me and murmured, "Some women know how to stay interesting. That matters in marriage more than girls like you realize." I did not answer because I was suddenly afraid of what my face might reveal. Later that night in the car, I asked Andrew whether he and Lauren were involved outside work. He exhaled through his nose like I had insulted him.
No.
Then why does your mother speak like that to me? You're reading drama into everything. She was talking about us. She was needling you because she knows you react, and you keep giving her exactly what she wants. Do you see how cleanly that works? He never addressed the substance. He only criticized my response. At work, meanwhile, my life remained intense but functional. That contrast kept me sane. I coordinated a waterfront corporate launch, managed a wedding where the florist lost half the arrangements, and handled a staffing shortage during a holiday conference week without collapsing.
People trusted me.
Paid me, thanked me. In one world, I was becoming a problem to be managed. In the other, I was the woman who solved impossible things before breakfast. That difference started waking me up. One evening, while searching for a vendor contract in our home office printer tray because Andrew used it during the day and I needed to print seating plans, I found another document mixed in with a paper stack. This one I understood immediately. It was a draft letter from a family law attorney requesting preliminary consultation regarding marital property division and temporary residence arrangements. Andrew Holloway's name was on it. No filing date. No official stamp. But it was real enough. My hands shook so hard that the paper clicked softly against the desk. He hadn't said divorce. He hadn't even said we were in serious trouble. He had simply been rearranging my access, letting his mother insult me, disappearing at night, and apparently speaking to attorneys while telling me my concern was anxiety. I took photos of every page. Then I put them back exactly as I found them. That was plant number 2, though I didn't yet know how central it would become. I sent the photos to Nora from the locked guest bathroom upstairs. Her reply came within 2 minutes. Do not confront him tonight. Save everything. Send me timestamps. And Rebecca? Start a written timeline from memory. Dates, comments, account changes, all of it. I leaned against the sink and stared at that message until my breathing slowed. There is a moment in every betrayal story where grief and intelligence finally meet. That was mine. I began documenting. Nothing dramatic at first. Just a private note on my phone hidden under a boring file name. Dates Patricia insulted me in front of people. The account notification change. The gala with Lauren. The lawyer draft. The trust summary with Graham Ashford's name. Andrew coming home at 12:43 a.m. on a Thursday smelling like restaurant wine and not office coffee. Patricia telling Martin in the kitchen that timing will matter and Rebecca must not know until Andrew is ready. I wrote everything I could remember. Not because I knew exactly what game they were playing, but because I had finally accepted that there was a game. Then came the week that broke the last remaining illusion. Patricia announced she was hosting a family dinner on Friday. Not extended family. Just the immediate household and Martin's younger brother Peter, who visited often enough to count as a family witness when Patricia wanted one. She insisted I be home early because a wife should still be present even if she can't contribute much else. I almost didn't go downstairs. But Nora had told me something important the day before. When people are preparing to move against you, they often get sloppier right before they think they've won. So I dressed carefully. Navy dress. Pearl earrings from my mother. No trembling hands visible. Dinner started strangely formal. Martin drank more than usual. Patricia was almost cheerful, which should have warned me. Andrew barely looked at me. Peter tried once to ask about work, but Patricia redirected the conversation twice. By the time dessert plates were cleared, the atmosphere felt staged. Then Andrew reached beside his chair, lifted a large envelope, and placed it on the table between us. My whole body went cold before I touched it.
His voice was steady.
Too steady. I think it would be better if we handle this like adults. I looked at the envelope and then at him. Handle what? Patricia answered before he could. An ending that has been overdue for some time. Inside were separation papers prepared by an attorney. Not yet court-filed, but professionally drafted. Temporary expectations. Residence departure request. Recommendations for asset review. Language about emotional incompatibility. No mention of cheating, money moves, or Patricia's role. Just a neat paper version of a marriage being quietly emptied out. I heard myself ask, "You were planning this while telling me I was imagining problems?" Andrew clasped his hands. I was trying not to escalate until I had a path forward. A path forward, as if I were traffic. I looked down and saw one line that hit harder than all the rest. Request that Rebecca Sloan vacate the Holloway residence within 14 days due to title ownership and family trust obligations. I looked up so fast my chair scraped. You want me out of the house? Patricia lifted her water glass with insulting calm. It is Andrew's family property. Surely you knew that. Of course I knew that, I said. But I am his wife. Andrew finally met my eyes directly. This isn't working anymore, Rebecca. I do not know what expression was on my face then, but Peter looked away. Martin said nothing. Not a word. Patricia had one hand folded in her lap like she was attending a recital. I asked Andrew, "Is this about Lauren?"
His jaw tightened.
This is about a marriage that has been strained for a long time. That was not a denial. I laughed once. I couldn't help it. Not because anything was funny, but because the elegance of his cowardice stunned me. Weeks of making me doubt myself, and now he wanted the dignity of a mature ending. Then Patricia, because cruelty is never satisfied with one wound, leaned forward and said, "Rebecca, let's not embarrass ourselves pretending this is sudden. A man eventually stops investing in a life that brings him stress, disappointment, and constant emotional instability." That word again. Instability. They were building a version of me. Quietly.
Carefully.
A wife too anxious to trust, too fragile to manage, too unproductive to remain. And here is where I need to tell you something that still makes my stomach turn. Andrew did not correct her. He let that version of me sit there like fact. I stood up and said, "So this was the plan. Strip my account access, speak to lawyers, let your mother prepare the room, and then tell me I'm the one escalating." Andrew's face hardened. "No one stripped you of anything." I wanted to throw the papers at him. I wanted to scream. Instead I said, "Then why were my banking alerts removed without my consent?" Silence. A split second. But enough. Patricia's eyes flicked to Andrew. That tiny look told me more than any confession could have. He recovered quickly. "Because you overreact to normal administrative changes." Peter shifted in his chair. Martin finally muttered, "Maybe everyone should calm down." It was pathetic. That late, that small. I gathered the papers, not to accept them, but to keep them. "And if I don't leave in 14 days? Patricia answered. "Then matters become more unpleasant than they need to be." Andrew added, "No one wants that." That was the first direct threat of the evening, and it was delivered softly enough that an outsider might have missed it. I said, "Are you threatening me with legal action in your mother's dining room?" Patricia gave a thin smile.
"No, dear.
"We're offering you the grace of a private solution." I remember every detail of the next minute. The chandelier light catching the rim of Patricia's glass. Martin refusing to look at me. The clock in the hallway ticking loud enough to be obscene. My own pulse in my ears. Then Andrew said the sentence that changed something permanent in me. "If you make this difficult, Rebecca, there are records and witnesses that won't help you." There it was. Not just abandonment. Construction. He had been preparing a case. Maybe not a criminal one, maybe not even a dramatic courtroom ambush, but enough to damage my credibility. Enough to suggest I was unstable, difficult, reactive, maybe unfit to negotiate cleanly, maybe too emotional to trust. I asked very quietly, "What records?" He held my gaze and said, "You've been under strain. People have noticed."
People.
A faceless weapon. The coward's favorite. I left the dining room before my body betrayed me. Went upstairs. Closed the bedroom door. Locked it. Then I sat on the floor with the separation packet in my lap and shook so hard I had to press my teeth together to stop them clicking. He had not just decided to leave me. He had decided to prepare my replacement version first. A little later, there was a knock at the bedroom door. Not Andrew. Patricia. "Rebecca," she called through the wood. "Dragging this out will only make you look worse." I didn't answer. She tried once more. "You were given an opportunity to leave with dignity. I suggest you take it." Then her footsteps faded. I sat there in the dark a long time, until the shock slowly made room for something sharper. Not rage, exactly.
Clarity.
Because now I knew I had not imagined any of it. The account changes were real. The lawyer draft was real. The pressure was real. The performance at dinner was real. And somewhere underneath all of it was still that strange trust paper with my name and Graham Ashford's. At around midnight, Andrew came into the bedroom as if he had any right to normal tone after that. He stood by the dresser and said, "I don't want this to become uglier than it has to." I was sitting on the edge of the bed by then, holding my phone in my hand beneath the blanket where he could not see that I had already started recording audio. I asked, "Is Lauren the reason?" He paused just long enough. "Lauren is not the issue." Still not a denial. Then he said something even more useful. "This house is protected. My attorney made that very clear. If you cooperate, you'll have time to relocate and this won't become public." Protected. My attorney. Won't become public. I asked, "And what exactly becomes public if I don't cooperate?" His expression changed. He realized too late that he had said too much. "Nothing. I'm trying to keep this respectful." But it was recorded. His voice. His implication. His planning. He slept in the guest room that night. I did not sleep at all. At 6:12 the next morning, while the house was still dim and quiet, I walked into the kitchen, took the recipe binder from the shelf, removed the trust document again, and photographed it front and back in better light. Then I opened my notes file and added every sentence from dinner I could remember word for word. By 6:35, I had sent Nora the audio clip and the photos. By 6:41, she called me. I stepped out onto the back porch in my robe because I didn't want anyone overhearing. Her voice was instantly awake. Listen to me carefully. Do not leave the house voluntarily until you have legal advice. Do not sign anything. Do not tell them what you've documented. And email everything to a new account they don't know about. I closed my eyes. Nora, I think they've been building some kind of instability narrative around me. I think so too, she said. And the fact that he referenced witnesses means he wants leverage, not fairness. I swallowed hard. What do I do? First, survive the day. Second, get copies of anything financial you can access. Third, I want the full image of that trust document because that name is bothering me. Graham Ashford?
Yes.
I know that firm. Or I know of it. Old money estate structures. Not your husband's usual world. Something about this is off. I turned and looked back through the kitchen windows. Patricia was already inside, standing at the counter in a silk robe, watching me through the glass with a cup in her hand.
Not pretending not to.
Just watching. I lowered my voice. She's looking at me right now. Good, Nora said coolly. Let her. Go back in. Be polite. Be forgettable. And Rebecca?
What?
This is the point where they expect you to panic.
Don't hand them that.
I disconnected and stood there one more second with the morning air cold on my face. I thought about my parents, about the woman I had been before I married into that house, about the years I had spent trying to be calm enough, patient enough, useful enough to earn security from people who only respected power. And then I thought about one small thing that suddenly did not feel small anymore. My late grandfather had once told my father that if anything ever happened, Ashford will know what to do. At the time, that meant nothing to me.
Old men say things like that.
Now, with Patricia's eyes on me through the kitchen glass and my husband preparing to move me out of my own life, it landed differently. For the first time, the name Graham Ashford did not feel like a random clue. It felt like a door. I need to pause here, because this was the moment where everything inside me split in two. If you had been in my place, would you have confronted them immediately with every document and recording, walked out to protect your peace, or stayed quiet long enough to understand the full trap before making your move? Tell me honestly, because I know some people will say I should have exploded right there and burned the whole house down with the truth. But looking back, I still believe this. Anger might have given them the scene they were preparing for, while patience gave me something far more dangerous to people like that: evidence, timing, and one call they never saw coming. A lot happened after that morning, so before I continue, here's the only short recap I need to give. My husband had quietly prepared separation papers. My mother-in-law was helping him build a narrative that I was unstable, and hidden among his documents was a strange financial paper with my name on it and the name Graham Ashford. I had recordings, photos, and a growing timeline, but I still did not know why that name mattered. What I did know was that if I moved too fast, I would hand them exactly the emotional mess they were hoping to use against me. The rest of that day passed like something staged by people who believed I had already lost. Patricia acted almost tender, which was somehow more chilling than her usual contempt. She asked whether I wanted tea. She suggested I take some time to reflect. She even told the housekeeper not to disturb me, which sounded considerate until I realized she was treating me like a guest whose checkout time had already been decided. Andrew left before noon wearing a navy suit and a watch I had bought him on our 4th anniversary. He did not kiss me goodbye. He did not ask whether I was all right. He only paused long enough to say, "Please don't do anything impulsive while I'm gone." That sentence sat in the room like a stain after he left. Anything impulsive. As though preserving myself from a coordinated betrayal would be the irrational part. I spent the afternoon doing exactly what Nora told me to do. Quietly, methodically. I opened a new email account for my work laptop during lunch under a name no one in that house would connect to me. Then I forwarded myself everything I could gather without making obvious changes. The photos of the legal draft, the trust summary, the fraud alert email, screenshots of bank access changes, and the audio file from Andrew's midnight conversation. I also went through old paper files in the downstairs desk Andrew barely thought I used. That was where I found the first real crack in their confidence. There was a manila folder labeled Household Tax Support, which sounded boring enough to remain unguarded. Inside were copies of property insurance statements, tax estimates, contractor invoices, and a letter from a trust administrator I had never heard of. It was addressed to Andrew, but the subject line made my heart stop. Pending notice obligation regarding legacy instruction for Rebecca Sloan. Not Rebecca Holloway. Rebecca Sloan. My maiden name. I sat there at the desk with the letter in my hand and felt the world tilt slightly. It was dated 7 months earlier. The language was stiff, formal, and full of the kind of phrases people use when they do not want ordinary readers to grasp the stakes too quickly. But the important parts were clear enough. There had been an obligation to notify me of some inheritance-related instruction after the death of a trustee. The firm had attempted to establish contact. Follow-up had been directed through an intermediary familiar to the family. There was mention of delay, review, and required acknowledgement. My fingers tightened around the page. Andrew had known. Not vaguely. Not indirectly. He had known there was something connected to my family, my old name, and some kind of legacy instruction, and he had not told me. He had sat through dinners, watched his mother humiliate me, drafted separation plans, and prepared to put me out of the house while apparently withholding information tied to my own family. That was the moment where grief stepped aside and something colder took over. Not revenge. Focus. I photographed every page, replaced everything exactly, and went upstairs to the bathroom because it was the only room with a lock Patricia did not question. Then I called Nora. She answered immediately. Tell me you found something useful. I found a letter, I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me, flatter than normal. It mentions a legacy instruction for Rebecca Sloan. My maiden name. It says there was a notice obligation. Andrew knew. There was a brief silence. Then Nora said, very carefully, read every line you can without skipping. I did. She stopped me twice to ask for exact wording. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. Rebecca, I need you to hear me clearly. This is no longer just about a failing marriage. If someone intentionally withheld notice of an inheritance-related instruction or interfered with your access to property or funds that are connected to you, that could become a serious civil issue, maybe more depending on intent and what was moved. My hand shook harder around the phone. So, he didn't just lie to me.
No.
If this is what it sounds like, he may have used your confusion as cover while moving around information you were entitled to receive. I leaned against the sink. Can he do that? He can try, Nora said. People try illegal things all the time. The question is whether they left a trail. That was the first time in weeks I felt something like air return to my lungs. A trail. People like Andrew and Patricia believed in polish, in control, in private solutions, which often meant they made the mistake of assuming they could manage paper as easily as they managed people. Nora told me not to confront anyone yet. She wanted copies, timestamps, and a meeting in person that same evening. I told Patricia I had a work emergency and needed to step out for 2 hours. She studied my face for a little too long before nodding. I could tell she was trying to decide whether I looked frightened enough. At Nora's townhouse, we spread everything across her dining table like two women reconstructing a crime scene from polite stationery. Nora wore reading glasses low on her nose and moved through each document with slow, ruthless concentration. She made notes in the margins of a yellow legal pad, circled dates, and built a parallel timeline to mine. The more she worked, the quieter she got. That worried me more than if she had sworn. Finally, she tapped the trust summary with the back of her pen. I think Graham Ashford is not just some wealthy friend. I think he may be the executor or trustee connected to your grandfather's side. I frowned. My grandfather wasn't rich. Rich and structured are not always the same thing, she said. Families hide all kinds of things. Land shares, business sale proceeds, life insurance held in trust, old investment vehicles. Sometimes people of ordinary appearance leave behind very non-ordinary legal arrangements, especially if there was one financially savvy friend handling things. I sat there staring at the papers. My maternal grandfather, Thomas Sloan, had died when I was 23. I loved him deeply, but he had never lived like a man with secret assets. He wore old cardigans, fixed things himself, and once spent an entire weekend teaching me how to patch drywall because he said labor made you less afraid of damage. The idea that he might have left something hidden behind legal structures felt unreal. Nora must have read the doubt on my face. It doesn't have to be mansion money to matter. Even a modern inheritance can become life-changing if someone is trying to block it while pushing you out of your home. Then she looked at me in a way that sharpened every nerve in my body. You need to call this man. Graham Ashford? Yes. At night. If he's the kind of man who uses old money estate firms, he has people screening his phone. But the name is in your paperwork. Your husband knew it. Your maiden name is tied to the notice obligation. We are past the point of feeling shy. I stared at the number printed in tiny type on the firm letterhead. My palms were damp. Say I do reach him, I asked. What do I even say? Nora's voice turned practical. You say your name. Your full name. You say you found documents indicating a delayed notice tied to a legacy instruction under your maiden name, and you believe someone in your marital household may have interfered with communication. Keep it factual. Don't overshare. Don't sound frantic. That last part almost made me laugh. Don't sound frantic. My husband was quietly replacing me, his mother was watching me like a chess piece, and I had just discovered that my own name had been buried in legal correspondence. But Nora was right. Emotion was a luxury I could not spend carelessly. So I called. The first time it went to an assistant service. I left my name and number. The second time, 30 minutes later, someone answered directly. The voice was older, male, composed. This is Graham Ashford. For a second, I forgot the script Nora and I had rehearsed. Then I said, my name is Rebecca Sloan. I believe there may have been delayed notice involving a legacy instruction connected to my family, and I found your name in documents that were never given to me. There was silence on the line. Not confusion. Recognition. When he spoke again, the calmness in his tone had changed shape. Rebecca Sloan? Yes. Thomas Sloan's granddaughter? My throat tightened. Yes. Another pause. Then he asked, who's been handling communication on your end? I looked at Nora. She nodded once. My husband, Andrew Holloway, I said. And I have reason to believe his mother may have been involved. What happened next is one of those moments I still replay, because it was the first time an outside person reacted like what was happening to me was not only wrong, but serious. Graham Ashford said, with no trace of softness, Mrs. Sloan, do not sign anything. Do not agree to vacate any residence tonight. Do not destroy any papers. I need your current address, and I need copies of everything you found sent to a secure office line immediately. Nora mouthed good. I gave the address of Nora's townhouse instead of the Holloway house. Then I asked the question that had been burning in my chest all day. What is this about? His answer came measured, but I could hear anger controlled beneath it. Your grandfather named you in a legacy arrangement that should have been placed directly under your control after a triggering review tied to my late brother's death last year. There is also a letter of intent regarding a residential property transfer held pending your acknowledgement. We were informed, repeatedly, that you were unavailable, distressed, and not in a position to manage complex matters. I could not speak for a second. Unavailable. Distressed. Not in a position. They had not just been insulting me in private. They had been using that version of me externally. I whispered, who told you that? An intermediary claiming to speak in the household's best interest, he said. Until this moment, we had no reason to think the information being provided was false. Nora closed her eyes and muttered under her breath, unbelievable. I said, what exactly did my grandfather leave me? Graham Ashford was quiet for a beat before answering. Enough that no one should have believed you needed to ask permission to stay under any man's roof. That sentence went through me like electricity. Not because it meant I had suddenly become some secret heiress from a fantasy story.
It didn't feel like that.
It felt older, sadder, and more personal. My grandfather, the man who patched drywall and carried peppermints in his pocket, had apparently tried to create a safety net for me. And I had been living in humiliation while the people around me suppressed it. Graham continued, I am in Charleston on unrelated business until tomorrow afternoon. I will come to you in person in the morning with documentation. You should also retain counsel immediately. Nora leaned closer to the phone. She has counsel support. He did not ask who she was. He simply said, good. Then tell your counsel to prepare for document preservation, notice of interference, and any necessary emergency filings if the husband attempts asset movement or coercive removal. After the call ended, I sat very still. Nora reached across the table and took my hand. You understand what this means, right? I shook my head once because I understood pieces, not the whole. It means they were not just pushing you out emotionally, she said. They may have been trying to isolate you before you learned you had independent leverage. Maybe they thought if you left quickly, signed quietly, and believed you had nowhere solid to stand, they could control the terms. I looked at the papers again. Why would Andrew do that? He already had money. Nora's expression hardened. People like Andrew do not always steal because they're desperate. Sometimes they steal because they cannot tolerate a shift in power. That night, I did not go back to the Holloway house. I sent Andrew a brief text that said I was staying with a colleague due to work obligations and needed space before discussing anything. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji. A thumbs up. That tiny symbol told me he still thought he was in control. The next morning, I borrowed one of Nora's navy blazers, tied my hair back, and sat by her front window with a legal pad in my lap. I was not trembling anymore.
I was too alert for that.
At 10:17 a.m., a black Rolls-Royce pulled up in front of the townhouse. That image stayed with me not because of the car itself, although yes, it was striking, but because of what it represented in that moment. Not glamour. Not fantasy. Seriousness. Structure. Consequence finally arriving at the curb. A driver stepped out first. Then a tall man in his late 60s emerged from the back seat wearing a charcoal coat, silver tie, and an expression that suggested he had spent his life making complicated situations behave. He was not flashy. If anything, he looked almost severe. When Nora opened the door, he said, Graham Ashford, and handed her a card before stepping inside. He turned to me at once. Rebecca. Not Mrs. Holloway. Rebecca. I stood, and before I could say anything, he looked at me carefully and said, You look like your grandfather around the eyes. That almost broke me. Almost. Instead, I asked him to sit down. He came prepared in a way that still impresses me when I think about it. A leather folio. Certified copies. Contact logs. A summary letter from the trust office. Notes on attempted notice. Documentation showing that after a trustee death the prior structure had required review and transfer preparation. My grandfather had apparently sold a small commercial parcel years before he died and, with Ashford's guidance, placed the proceeds into a modest but well-managed legacy trust. It had grown over time. There was also a small townhouse in Savannah, purchased through an entity and held with instructions that it become available to me under specific review conditions if I was ever in marital instability or financial vulnerability. I just stared at him. It was not private jet money. Not endless money. It was something far more believable and, to me, more moving than that. It was thoughtful money. Protective money. The kind arranged by an older man who knew life could corner a woman and wanted to leave her one locked door that opened outward. Graham pointed to the contact history. We attempted notice by certified mail after the review was triggered. The response from the residents claimed you were emotionally overwhelmed and preferred household management through your husband. Later communication suggested you were considering divorce, had inconsistent judgment, and should not be burdened until matters stabilized. There it was again. The script. I said, Those are Patricia's phrases. Nora said, And Andrew used the same framing with her. Graham's mouth tightened. Then your household may have coordinated misrepresentation. I asked the question I was almost afraid to hear answered. Was anything transferred out of my trust? No direct principal transfer, he said. But there are discussions initiated from your husband's side about whether marital consolidation or advisory alignment would be efficient once formal notice occurred. We declined. Nora sat back slowly. So, he was trying to get close enough to shape the outcome. Graham inclined his head. That would be my interpretation. I remember looking down at my own hands then, the same hands Patricia had treated like decorative labor, and feeling a wave of rage, so sharp it surprised me. Not at the money itself. At the arrogance. At the assumption that I could be softened, belittled, and managed until I signed away my own footing. Graham was practical, not theatrical. He did not tell me everything would be fine. He told me what to do. First, retain divorce counsel separate from Nora's informal help, since Nora did not practice family law. Second, send preservation notice through counsel regarding all financial records, communications, and property-related drafts. Third, do not return alone to retrieve belongings. Fourth, do not discuss the trust or townhouse with Andrew until strategy was in place. Fifth, document every threat, pressure statement, or attempt to characterize me as unstable. Simple.
Clear.
Actionable. That clarity steadied me more than comfort would have. By that afternoon, Nora had referred me to a family law attorney named Melissa Grant, a sharp, patient woman with the kind of face that made liars over-explain. Melissa read the separation packet, listened to the audio clip, reviewed the account change issue, and then asked for my timeline. She did not interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "All right. Here's what matters immediately. Your husband can ask for separation. He cannot rewrite your reality while doing it. We are not going to let informal intimidation become legal fact." She explained the process in language that felt clear instead of overwhelming. Because Andrew had not yet formally filed, we had room to act before his narrative hardened into paperwork. She would send a preservation letter requiring that he and his counsel maintain all records relevant to finances, communications, and residence arrangements. We would also prepare a response making clear that I had not voluntarily abandoned the marital home, that I disputed any characterization of mental instability, and that any attempt to force me out based on pressure or false framing could be raised in court. On the financial side, if needed, a separate civil attorney could address interference related to delayed notice and any misrepresentation involving my trust interests. Then she looked at me and said the sentence I needed most. "You are not as cornered as they wanted you to believe." That evening, under Melissa's instructions, I returned to the Holloway house only once, accompanied by Nora and a retired deputy named Samuel Pike, whom Melissa sometimes used for civil standby situations when tensions were likely. We did not need flashing lights or drama. We needed witnesses. Patricia opened the door and for one brief second looked genuinely startled to see me flanked by two calm adults and carrying a folder instead of tears. "Rebecca," she said, recovering quickly, "this is excessive." Nora smiled with almost painful politeness.
No.
"This is documented." Andrew appeared at the end of the hall in shirt sleeves, eyes moving from me to Samuel to the folder in my hand. "What is this?" I met his gaze. "I'm collecting personal belongings and relevant records. Through counsel, you'll be receiving notice to preserve all documents and communications related to our marriage, finances, and residence." He stared at me like I had briefly become a language he did not speak. Patricia's expression sharpened. "Counsel? Over a private family matter?" Melissa had told me to expect that line. So I answered exactly as rehearsed. It stopped being private when misinformation and coercive pressure entered the process. Samuel said nothing. He didn't need to. He simply stood there writing down time and location in a small notebook. That visual alone changed the air. Andrew stepped closer. "Rebecca, can we talk alone?"
No.
It was the first clean no I had given him in months. He looked thrown, then irritated. "You're escalating this beyond reason." Nora said, "Funny. That seems to be your favorite phrase when someone else starts keeping records." Patricia drew herself up. "I will not be spoken to like this in my own home." I turned to her. "You had no trouble speaking to me however you wanted in it." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Not because she had become ashamed, but because for the first time the audience had changed. I gathered essential clothes, my personal documents, family photos, my mother's pearl bracelet, and a box of letters from my parents. In Andrew's office, I also found what I had been hoping to locate before they realized how much I knew, a printed chain of emails between Andrew and a financial advisor discussing anticipated marital restructuring, notification timing, and whether beneficiary awareness would affect household planning. There were no blunt criminal confessions. Intelligent people rarely write those. But there was enough language to show intent, timing, and self-interest. I photographed everything. When Andrew saw me standing near the printer, he crossed the room too fast. "What are you doing?" I held his gaze. "Looking at what you never planned to explain." He lowered his voice immediately, aware of the others nearby. "You have no right to take private business documents." "Interesting," I said, "because you seemed very comfortable involving yourself in mine." That landed. His face changed. Just for a second, the practiced calm cracked, and something raw showed through fear. There it was. Finally. On the drive back to Nora's, she glanced at me from the passenger seat and said, "I need to ask something unpleasant." "Go ahead. Do you think Lauren knows?" I looked out the window for a moment before answering. "I think she knows enough to benefit from his choices. Whether she knows all of it is another question." That turned out not to matter for long, because 3 days later, we entered the stage where preparation becomes strategy. Melissa sent the preservation notice and response letter. A civil attorney she brought in for consultation reviewed the trust interference issue and said the strongest path initially was to document misrepresentation and preserve the option of a formal claim if direct damages became clearer. Graham's office provided a signed summary confirming the delayed notice history and the statements made by the intermediary regarding my supposed emotional instability. Melissa nearly smiled when she read that. "That," she said, tapping the page, "is the kind of polished nonsense that falls apart beautifully under scrutiny." Meanwhile, I kept building the file. I pulled screenshots of my old message history with Andrew showing the dates he had reassured me nothing serious was wrong while apparently consulting attorneys. I downloaded our gala photos where Lauren appeared beside him looking far too comfortable for an unrelated consultant. I requested bank records in person and obtained confirmation of the notification changes and linked transfer activity. I wrote out every line Patricia had used more than once to describe me as unstable, overwhelmed, or difficult. Nora helped me organize it all into clean folders: timeline, finances, trust notice, legal drafts, household pressure, witness notes. The evidence was no longer emotional. It was structured. And once a story becomes structured, people who depend on confusion start losing oxygen. Around then, Martin called me for the first time since the dinner. That alone was shocking. I answered because Melissa told me not to avoid calls, only to document them. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Rebecca, I thought I should tell you that things have gotten tense here." I almost laughed. "That's generous of you."
He sighed.
"Patricia believes you're being influenced."
"No," I said.
"I'm being informed." There was a long silence. Then he said, low and strained, "I didn't know about all of it." That sentence annoyed me more than an outright lie would have. "Which part?" I asked. "The lawyer? The account changes? The attempt to paint me as unstable? The inheritance notice being delayed?" He went very quiet. That told me enough. When he spoke again, he sounded ashamed. Andrew said it was complicated. Complicated for who? He had no answer. But before the call ended, he said one useful thing. Patricia planned a dinner this Saturday. Some family, some friends, Andrew's counsel, and that consultant woman. She thinks if everything looks settled in public, it becomes harder for you to fight. After I hung up, I stared at the wall for a long time. Because that was it. That was the stage. Patricia was doing what people like her always do when private control begins slipping. She was trying to create social reality. If enough respectable witnesses saw me as absent, unreasonable, or already replaced, then maybe the truth would feel like poor manners when it arrived. Melissa agreed at once. "That dinner may be the cleanest opportunity you're going to get." We did not act recklessly. We prepared. She contacted Andrew's attorney directly and requested a formal meeting the same afternoon regarding temporary arrangements, making it harder for him to claim surprise later. Graham agreed to be available in person if necessary. Nora organized the document set. Samuel remained on standby. And I, the woman they had spent months training into self-doubt, Chose my outfit like armor. No dramatics. No revenge dress fantasy. Just a cream blouse, dark trousers, low heels, and my mother's pearls again. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a sane, prepared woman who had been underestimated. Before I continue, I want your honest opinion here. If you had all the proof I had by then, would you have confronted them privately through lawyers only, shown up in person while they still thought they controlled the story, or stayed silent longer and let them dig even deeper? Some people might say walking into that dinner was too risky. Maybe. But by that point, I understood something I hadn't understood at the beginning. People like Patricia and Andrew were counting on my shame to keep their lies elegant, and I was finally too awake to help them do it. Saturday evening arrived warm and windless. The Holloway house glowed like it always did before guests. Porch lights, polished brass, catered trays moving through the dining room, cars lining the curb. Patricia loved staging normality around cruelty. To her, social beauty was proof of moral authority. When I arrived, I did not come alone. Graham's Rolls-Royce pulled up first. Melissa arrived separately 2 minutes later. Nora came with me in the back seat. I watched through the tinted window as the front door opened before we even reached the steps. Patricia had apparently been monitoring arrivals, expecting admiration, not interruption. The expression on her face when she saw me step out beside Graham Ashford was worth every sleepless night. Not because it was cartoonish. It wasn't.
Patricia was too disciplined for that.
But she lost one beat. One perfectly polished beat. And for a woman like her, that was the sound of panic. Andrew came into the hall just behind her and stopped cold when he saw Graham. He knew him instantly. That mattered. Patricia recovered first. Rebecca, this is highly inappropriate. Melissa stepped forward, card in hand. Melissa Grant, counsel for Rebecca Sloan. We're here because it appears several matters overlap more than your household suggested. That sentence landed in the entry hall like a dropped tray. Guests had already begun noticing. Peter was in the sitting room. Martin was near the staircase. Lauren stood by the dining archway in a pale dress, suddenly very still. Andrew's attorney, a silver-haired man I later learned was named Robert Hale, emerged from the library with a tired expression of someone who had just realized his client had not told him everything. Andrew lowered his voice. Rebecca, not here. I looked directly at him. You chose here. Then I stepped into the house. No one stopped me. The next minutes moved quickly, but in my memory they remain precise. Melissa requested a private but witness discussion in the front sitting room because legal issues had now intersected with residence pressure, marital separation, and possible misrepresentation involving third-party notice. Robert Hale, to his credit, did not grandstand. He took one look at Graham Ashford, one look at the documentation in Melissa's folder, and said, I think we should all sit down. So we did. Patricia objected immediately. This is absurd. Rebecca is emotional and trying to create a spectacle. Melissa slid one page across the table. It was the summary from Graham's office documenting the delayed notice and the intermediary representations about my condition. Then it's unfortunate, Melissa said calmly, that someone appears to have described my client as emotionally unstable in order to interfere with direct notice tied to her own family legacy arrangement. Silence. Real silence this time. Not polite dinner table silence. Consequence silence. Andrew looked at Graham. I never interfered with her property. Graham's voice was smooth as stone. Then you'll have no trouble explaining why communications directed to Rebecca Sloan were answered through your household, why delay was encouraged, and why advisory alignment was raised before she had been properly notified. Robert Hale turned to Andrew slowly. Advisory alignment? Andrew said nothing. That told his attorney as much as it told the rest of us. Melissa then placed the printed email chain on the table. Not every page at once. Just enough. Timing notes. Beneficiary awareness. Household planning. Marital restructuring. It was the legal equivalent of opening a window and letting in cold air. Lauren, from where she stood near the doorway, said quietly, Andrew, what is this? He ignored her. Patricia tried a new angle. This is a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect Rebecca from complexity, during a fragile time. Nora actually laughed.
Once.
Sharp and unbelieving. Interesting, she said. Because the fragile time seems to line up very neatly with your son drafting separation papers and pushing her out of the house. Melissa added the midnight audio transcript next. Andrew's voice. Protected house. Attorney. Public consequences if I failed to cooperate. Robert Hale read it, closed his eyes briefly, and then looked at his client with the expression of a man deciding how much distance he needed for professional survival. Martin finally spoke. Patricia, she snapped, don't start. But he did, maybe because the room had shifted too far for cowardice to feel safe anymore. You told me it was to keep things orderly, he said. You didn't say it involved her family matters. Patricia's face turned toward him with pure fury. And that, more than anything, confirmed it for every witness in the room. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated effort that had started losing discipline. I took out one last document myself. The bank confirmation. My hands were steady. I placed it in front of Andrew. Do you want to explain why my account notifications were removed during the same period you were discussing marital restructuring and beneficiary awareness? He looked at the paper, then at me, then away. No answer. The room had widened somehow. I could feel the guests in the next room pretending not to listen while listening to every breath. Then Lauren asked the question I hadn't expected. Was I brought in because you were actually leaving your wife, she said, voice thin now, or because you thought she was about to come into money? Andrew turned toward her sharply. This is not the time.
But it was exactly the time.
She stared at him like a woman suddenly seeing the architecture behind her own flattery. Oh my God. I did not enjoy that moment the way some people might assume. I was too tired for triumph like that. But I did register something grimly satisfying in it. Deceit has a way of eventually humiliating everyone who agreed to stand near it. Robert Hale cleared his throat. Given what I've now seen, I'm advising my client not to say anything further tonight without a fuller review.
Melissa nodded.
Wise. Graham then did something very simple and devastating. He handed me a certified envelope across Patricia's own sitting room table.
Formal notice, he said.
Delivered directly. My name was on it. Rebecca Sloan. Not as someone's wife. Not as a dependent. Not as a problem to be managed.
Just me.
I opened it there. Inside was the official acknowledgement of the trust arrangement, the release structure, and the property letter concerning the Savannah townhouse. Graham had already arranged for me to access it immediately if I chose. Patricia looked at the page and then at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked unsure of which script still worked. She said, very carefully, Rebecca, perhaps we should discuss this as family. I almost smiled. Family. That word she had used like a locked gate for years. I answered, no. I think we've discussed enough as family. Then I stood. Everything after that moved through channels instead of chaos, which was exactly what I wanted. Melissa and Robert Hale agreed to schedule formal follow-up the next business day. Andrew was instructed not to contact me outside counsel except for logistical matters. Graham's office documented the delivery and misrepresentation concerns. Samuel, who had entered quietly near the end at Melissa's request, remained long enough to witness that no one blocked my exit or interfered with the certified materials. As Nora and I walked back toward the front door, Patricia said my name one more time. I turned. She looked older in that moment. Not softer. Just older. The strain of losing control had taken something visible from her posture. You are making a mistake, she said. I held her gaze and answered with more calm than I thought I had left.
No.
I made the mistake when I kept confusing endurance with safety. Then I left. What followed was not instant justice tied up with a bow. Real consequences are slower, more administrative, and in some ways more satisfying because of it. Andrew filed formally within 2 weeks, but his position had weakened. Melissa's early preservation work mattered. So did the audio, the email language, the bank notification change, and the trust office summary. The divorce process became contentious, but not on the terms he wanted. He could not cleanly paint me as unstable because too many documents now existed showing planning, pressure, and strategic omission from his side. His attorney eventually steered him toward a more measured settlement posture, which told me Robert Hale had no interest in defending fantasy. The marital home was not mine on paper, and I never pretended otherwise. But that did not mean Andrew got to erase 6 years of contribution and walk away wearing innocence like a tie. Through counsel, the Financial Review forced more transparency than he wanted. I recovered certain personal funds, reimbursement for documented household expenditures made from my accounts, and a fairer separation structure than the one he had prepared in that dining room. The trust issue did not explode into a dramatic public lawsuit, mostly because once Melissa and the civil attorney made clear what records could be subpoenaed and how ugly the timeline might look, the appetite for further games shrank. Graham's office completed direct transfer procedures properly. The Savannah townhouse became mine to use, lease, or sell. I chose to move there for a year. Not forever. Just long enough to hear my own thoughts without Holloway voices around them. As for Patricia, social circles do what courts sometimes cannot. They remember patterns. The story that moved through their world was not the one she had prepared. It was quieter and more poisonous to her reputation than open scandal. She had overreached. She had involved herself in matters tied to her daughter-in-law's family legacy. She had treated private separation like a social staging opportunity. Invitations thinned. Committees became polite but distant. No one said she was banished. Women like Patricia are rarely punished that theatrically. But the warmth went out of rooms for her, and she knew why. Martin sent me a handwritten apology 3 months later. Not an excuse.
Not enough, either.
Just an apology. I believed he meant it. I also believed it came far too late to matter in the way he hoped. Lauren disappeared from Andrew's life quickly, from what I heard. I don't know whether she left because she felt deceived or because she realized he was the kind of man who treated women like positions to be managed once their usefulness changed. Either way, she left. That was her lesson to carry. Andrew tried, twice, to speak to me without lawyers after everything settled. The first time was by phone. I let it go to voicemail. He said he wanted to explain. The second time was outside a mediation office months later. He said, "I never meant for it to happen like this." That sentence used to be the kind of thing that would have trapped me in analysis for weeks. Did he mean it? Was he ashamed? Was he trying, clumsily, to reach for something human? By then, I had changed enough to understand that intention is often the least interesting part of harm. I answered, "But it did happen like this. And you helped build it." Then I walked away. The Savannah townhouse was small, sunlit, and imperfect in ways I adored immediately. The bedroom windows stuck in humid weather. The kitchen tile was older than I liked. One cabinet smelled faintly of cedar because the previous owner had lined it badly years ago. But it was quiet.
Mine. Safe.
The first night I slept there, I cried so hard I gave myself a headache, and not because I was unhappy. Because my body finally understood it did not need to listen for Patricia's footsteps anymore. I kept working. That part mattered to me. I did not want to become a woman whose story ended only in escape. I wanted a life that kept extending forward. 6 months after the divorce process began, I was promoted into regional operations for the hotel group. Elise Carter, my CFO, later admitted she had suspected for months that something was wrong at home because competent women don't suddenly start apologizing before asking normal questions unless someone is training them to. She was right. Nora stayed exactly who she had always been. Blunt, loyal, and impossible to charm into dishonesty. Graham remained in my life in a quieter way than you might expect. Not as some dramatic replacement savior. He was an older family friend who took my grandfather's instructions seriously and, when the time came, refused to let polished people bury me under administrative fog. Sometimes the most powerful rescue is not a man sweeping in to take over. Sometimes it is someone arriving with certified documents, a good memory, and zero tolerance for manipulation. That matters to me, so I'm saying it clearly. Yes, the Rolls-Royce arrived. Yes, the room changed when Graham stepped out. But the real rescue was not the car. It was the truth. It was documentation. It was finally being believed. It was discovering that my grandfather had loved me carefully enough to think ahead. And it was realizing that I had more strength than the people around me ever wanted me to notice. If you're wondering what kind of ending this was, I'd call it empowered with a little grief still stitched into it. I did not get my marriage back. I did not get those 6 years returned in better shape. I did not get an apology that matched the damage. What I got was sight. And once I had that, I stopped mistaking expensive houses for safety, polished voices for integrity, and patience for virtue, when it was really fear in nicer clothes. From everything I lived through, I learned that control often arrives disguised as concern. People will call you emotional, unstable, confused, or difficult when what they really mean is that you're beginning to notice them clearly. And once you do, the most powerful thing you can protect is not their opinion of you, but your access to the truth. Now that you know the whole story, I really want to hear what you think. Did you feel angry for me? Or do you believe I should have confronted them earlier and more aggressively? If you had been in my place, would you have walked into that dinner with the evidence? Or handled everything quietly through attorneys only? And if you've ever had someone make you question your own memory, your worth, or your right to stand on your own feet, tell me how you got through it. Your story might be exactly what someone else reading these comments needs tonight. If this confession stayed with you, please leave a comment and tell me where you stand. Share this story with someone who knows what family pressure, betrayal, or quiet manipulation feels like. And if you want more real-life drama like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and come back for the next story.